Welcome back, ARMY and pop culture enthusiasts. 2026 has been an absolute whirlwind, but nothing prepared us for the seismic shifts shaking the foundations of the global music industry, courtesy of the world's biggest group. After years of military hiatuses, anticipated reunions, and solo eras, BTS completely rewrote the playbook this year with choices nobody saw coming. Are you ready to uncover the massive shifts that redefined their legacy? Which member took a financial gamble that shocked Wall Street, and who completely flipped the script on global diplomacy? Let's dive straight into the ultimate countdown. Number 7. Jungkook, The Raw Rebellion, Crashing the System, Pure Live. When we talk about the golden maknae, Jungkook, the global audience immediately pictures a flawless pop titan, an untouchable icon, right? I mean, just look back at his history before his military enlistment. He was absolutely dominating the global charts with insanely polished, slick, and choreography-heavy mega hits like Seven and Standing Next to You, essentially cementing himself as the ultimate modern pop prince who could do absolutely no wrong and seamlessly navigate the highly commercialized Western music market. Everyone from seasoned industry insiders down to the most hardcore armies fully expected that when 2026 finally rolled around and BTS reunited for their earth-shattering, highly anticipated Arirang World Tour, Jungkook would simply slide right back into that multi-million-dollar, highly manufactured pop perfection, complete with elaborate backup dancers, stunning visual effects, and the safety net of perfectly mixed backing tracks that have become the industry standard. But oh boy, were we entirely wrong, because what Jungkook actually decided to do in the late summer of 2026 completely flipped the script, fiercely challenged the multi-billion-dollar live music industry, and sparked a massive global debate about what it truly means to be a live performer in the modern, overly digitized era of music. Imagine this intensely cinematic scenario. Just 2 weeks before the massive kickoff of the Arirang Tour, a tour that literally broke the internet, caused ticketing platforms to completely crash with queues exceeding tens of millions of desperate fans, and promised revolutionary 360-degree stadium stages, stretching from Los Angeles' massive SoFi Stadium all the way to Jakarta's iconic Gelora Bung Karno. A mysterious, completely unannounced event took place on the bustling, neon-lit streets of Hongdae in Seoul. Late at night, without any massive PR campaigns, without any security perimeters, bodyguards, or flashy announcement notifications on weavers, a guy dressed in a faded, oversized hoodie, ripped vintage jeans, and a simple black beanie pulled low over his eyes, quietly set up a battered acoustic guitar, a cheap, worn-out portable amplifier, and a single standard microphone right there on the cold pavement. Pedestrians were just walking by, minding their own business, entirely unaware of the history about to unfold, until the guy finally strummed the guitar and started singing. The very moment that unmistakable, honey-coated yet incredibly powerful, soul-piercing voice hit the cool night air, the entire street practically froze in disbelief. It was Jungkook, completely stripping away the billion-dollar hive machinery, standing there under the streetlights, just singing his absolute heart out with zero auto-tune, zero backing tracks, zero earpieces, and absolutely no safety net. This wasn't just a cute, spontaneous publicity stunt to drum up hype for the tour. It was a full-blown, deeply emotional, artistic rebellion that had been brewing inside him for years. For over an hour, he performed incredibly raw, gritty rock and stripped-down acoustic renditions of his biggest solo hits and BTS classics, and when the shaky smartphone videos inevitably went viral, completely breaking social media algorithms and trending worldwide within mere minutes, Jungkook dropped a bombshell, highly emotional statement on a sudden live stream that sent absolute shockwaves through the sterile corporate offices of global music labels. Looking straight into the camera, looking more relaxed and authentic than ever before, Jungkook announced that for the entirety of the 2026 Arirang World Tour and for all his future solo stages, he was officially and permanently banning the use of AR, all recorded, and MR, music recording unrecorded backing tracks, a fiercely independent move that is practically unheard of and considered career suicide in the highly synchronized, physically demanding, perfection-obsessed world of K-pop and modern stadium pop. He stated with a raw, tear-jerking honesty that deeply moved millions of fans around the world that his grueling time away in the military, stripped of the glamour and the superstar treatment, made him painfully realize how dangerously disconnected the music industry was becoming from the true, unfiltered essence of human expression, a space where robotic perfection and algorithm-driven performances had completely overshadowed raw passion, and where artists were tragically becoming prisoners to backtrack synchronization, rather than truly feeling the living, breathing pulse of the live crowd. He passionately declared that he desperately wanted to hear his own heavy breathing. He actually wanted to risk the occasional human voice crack. He wanted to feel the real sweat, the pure adrenaline, and he fully embraced the beautiful, vulnerable imperfections of a 100% pure, live rock band performance. And incredibly, he didn't just stop there. To the absolute panic of concert organizers, tour promoters, and the sheer, unadulterated delight of global fans, Jungkook began executing these guerrilla, completely unauthorized street busking sessions in major cities globally right before the official stadium tour dates, spontaneously showing up in Washington Square Park in New York City, taking over Trafalgar Square in London, and even setting up near the iconic Merlion in Singapore, forcing massive, euphoric crowds to gather organically without a single ticket being sold or a dime being spent. This initial industry backlash was intensely hostile, with cynical music critics and rival entertainment company executives claiming he was being recklessly unprofessional, heavily disrupting public order, or smugly predicting that he wouldn't physically be able to sustain the immense stamina required to belt out completely live, unfiltered vocals over roaring stadium crowds of 60,000 people for months on end, constantly running around a massive 360-degree stage. But Jungkook, wielding his sheer, undeniable talent as his ultimate weapon, silenced every single doubter and critic the exact moment the Arirang tour officially began. The second he stepped onto that breathtaking stage, opting out of the traditional army of backup dancers and instead being backed by a fierce, exceptionally talented live rock band, he unleashed vocals so incredibly powerful, emotionally charged, raw, and earth-shattering that they literally vibrated the stadium seats, making the entire audience realize that music history had just been irrevocably altered right before their very eyes. He masterfully transformed these massive, cold, impersonal concrete stadiums into intimate, sweaty, electrifying underground rock clubs, definitively proving that true, once-in-a-generation talent doesn't ever need to hide behind studio magic, auto-tune, or elaborate visual distractions to capture a crowd's soul. This shocking, immensely brave pivot didn't just permanently change Jungkook's own artistic trajectory, it practically ignited a massive, unavoidable cultural reset across the entire global music scene in the year 2026. Suddenly, major Western pop stars and top-tier K-pop idol groups were being heavily, sometimes ruthlessly scrutinized by the public and the media. A new phenomenon dubbed the Jungkook standard was aggressively born, where modern audiences began rightfully demanding entirely live vocals and deeply authentic, emotionally resonant performances, aggressively rejecting lip-syncing and heavy backing tracks, which effectively forced giant record labels to drastically and urgently overhaul their idol training systems and live concert production methods worldwide. It was a profound, deeply inspiring shock to the system that vividly reminded everyone why we truly fell in love with music in the first place, beautifully proving that the golden maknae had powerfully evolved from a flawlessly constructed perfect pop idol into an untouchable, fiercely independent musical legend who was completely, utterly unafraid to tear down the very restrictive, manufactured system that originally built him, all just to find and share his true, unfiltered voice with the world once again.
Number 6. V. The Cinematic Rebellion, rejecting Hollywood's millions for the soul of indie cinema. When you look at Kim Tae-young, universally known as V, you are looking at a man who possesses a visual elegance and an atmospheric aura that seems almost tailor-made for the silver screen. For years, film critics, legendary directors, and millions of fans worldwide practically begged for his return to acting, especially after his brilliant, albeit brief performance in the historical drama Hwarang way back in his rookie days. Following his honorable discharge from the military, the global entertainment industry went into an absolute feeding frenzy. Every single major Hollywood studio, streaming giant, and top-tier agency in Los Angeles was aggressively knocking on Hybe's doors, desperate to sign him. By early 2026, inside sources and major entertainment trade publications like Variety and The Hollywood Reporter began leaking absolutely mind-boggling rumors that V was actively being courted for a lead role in a massive multi-million-dollar Marvel Cinematic Universe blockbuster, alongside an astronomical historic contract offer rumored to be worth upwards of $20 million, a deal that would have instantly made him one of the highest-paid Asian actors in Hollywood history. The entire world held its collective breath, fully expecting V to make the grand, predictable leap into Western mainstream cinema, cementing his status as a global box office titan. But in typical, wonderfully unpredictable Kim Tae-young fashion, he didn't just decline the staggering Hollywood contract, he completely shattered the conventional blueprint of global stardom by quietly executing a creative pivot so radical, so deeply artistic, and so intensely personal that it left both Wall Street executives and Tinseltown agents completely speechless. Instead of flying out to a luxurious high-tech studio lot in Los Angeles, surrounded by hundreds of crew members, trailers, and standard corporate handlers, Tae-young secretly packed a single suitcase and disappeared for 3 grueling months into a remote, windswept, and melancholic coastal village in the south of Italy. Partnering with a virtually unknown, fiercely independent European neo-realist director who had never even made a commercial feature film before, V chose to completely fund, executive produce, and star in a deeply experimental, intensely gritty indie art house film titled The Silent Echo of Blue. This wasn't just a simple side project or a vanity piece to show off his artsy side. This was a total, unapologetic deconstruction of his own global superstar identity. In this profoundly avant-garde film, Tae-young played the role of a completely mute, deeply traumatized former fisherman struggling with grief, isolation, and the slow decay of his coastal town. To fully immerse himself into this emotionally draining and physically punishing role, Tae-young demanded that the production crew use absolutely no makeup, no flattering lighting, and no stylized wardrobe. He spent months wearing tattered, salt-stained clothing, working long hours in the freezing, unforgiving ocean waters, and letting his face become weathered, raw, and exhausted. For a man celebrated globally as one of the most beautiful faces in modern fashion and pop culture, a permanent fixture at high-end Paris Fashion Week events, this was a breathtakingly brave and shocking aesthetic sacrifice. The film featured absolutely no dialogue from his character, forcing Tae-young to rely entirely on the raw, unfiltered expressive power of his eyes, his heavy body language, and his deeply agonizing facial micro-expressions to convey a lifetime of profound human suffering. It was a massive, incredibly risky creative gamble that threatened to alienate his massive global pop fan base, who were used to his slick, glamorous, and effortlessly cool persona. When the film was secretly submitted and unexpectedly accepted at the main competition at the prestigious 2026 Cannes Film Festival, the global film community was struck with a wave of intense skepticism, with many cynical Western critics arrogantly assuming it was merely a cynical marketing ploy to bring K-pop star power to an elite film festival. But the moment the lights dimmed in the iconic Palais des Festivals and the movie began to play, all that skepticism instantly evaporated into thin air, replaced by a heavy, breathless awe. Taeyoung's performance was nothing short of a revelation. It was an incredibly haunting, raw, and deeply poetic tour de force that completely stripped away the glossy veneer of the K-pop idol, revealing a profoundly serious, deeply intellectual dramatic actor of the highest caliber. When the credits finally rolled, the notoriously brutal and hard-to-please Cannes audience erupted in a spectacular, tearful 10-minute standing ovation, and just days later, Kim Tae-young made history by becoming the first ever K-pop idol to win the highly coveted Best Actor award at Cannes. In his deeply moving, wonderfully humble acceptance speech, delivered with his signature deep, soul-stirring baritone, V looked out at the elite of the global film industry and emotionally reflected on his shocking choice, stating that his time away in the military had forced him to look deep within his own soul, far beyond the blinding, deafening screams of stadium crowds and the superficial, intoxicating traps of global fame. He chose the cold, unforgiving winds of an independent Italian film over the comfortable multi-million-dollar green screens of Hollywood because he wanted to touch something real, something raw, and something completely immortal. The profound cultural shockwaves of this historic victory completely reshaped the landscape of international cinema and the global entertainment industry in 2026. Taeyoung effectively demolished the long-standing, incredibly restrictive glass ceiling and the deeply ingrained industry biases that historically pigeonholed K-pop idols as mere manufactured, superficial entertainers incapable of profound artistic depth. Suddenly, the world's most elite visionary filmmakers, from Martin Scorsese to Bong Joon-ho, were publicly praising his artistic integrity and actively seeking him out for serious, complex, dramatic roles, recognizing him not as a pop star trying his hand at acting, but as a fiercely independent, boundary-pushing cinematic artist. Furthermore, his bold, uncompromising move inspired a massive, highly necessary revolution among young artists across the globe, sparking a powerful cultural movement where mainstream pop icons began rejecting safe, corporate, algorithm-driven studio projects in favor of supporting raw, independent, and deeply meaningful artistic expressions. Kim Tae-young didn't just change the game, he completely redefined the very nature of global stardom, proving to an astonished world that the ultimate form of power isn't accepting a $20 million Hollywood contract, but having the immense courage, the profound artistic vision, and the absolute freedom to say no to the money, step into the shadows, and create a timeless masterpiece entirely on your own terms.
Number 5. Suga, the corporate defiance shaking Wall Street, the revolution of absolute ownership. When you think of Min Yoongi, the fierce, unapologetically raw genius known as Suga or August D, you instantly picture a man who has spent his entire life fighting against the system, turning his intense pain, sweat, and tears into masterpieces of musical rebellion. From his early, agonizing days as an impoverished underground rapper in Daegu, literally having to choose between buying a cheap bowl of black bean noodles or paying for a bus ride home, Yoongi has always possessed a profound, deeply rooted resentment toward a predatory music industry that systematically exploits young, starry-eyed, and vulnerable creators. We all witnessed his solo August D World Tour before his military enlistment, a tour that felt like an emotional exorcism, but nobody on God's green earth could have ever anticipated the absolute nuclear bomb of a corporate power move he was quietly plotting during his time away from the blinding spotlights. In the spring of 2026, just as the global financial markets were adjusting to the massive economic boom of BTS's full group return, Min Yoongi didn't just drop a surprise album or announce a clothing line. Instead, he stepped onto a sleek, high-tech stage at a global tech and finance summit in New York City, traded his leather jackets for a sharp, tailored charcoal suit, and completely shook the global entertainment industry to its very absolute core by announcing the launch of D-Town Global, a revolutionary, decentralized, and completely
completely artist-owned global music streaming and distribution platform designed to directly annihilate the predatory monopolies of giant streaming corporations and traditional greedy record labels. This wasn't just a simple, trendy celebrity business venture or a superficial endorsement deal. This was a meticulously calculated, multi-million-dollar act of pure financial and systemic warfare that Yoongi had been secretly funding, designing, and patenting entirely from his own personal fortune and through highly classified tech partnerships over the last 3 years. For decades, the dark, dirty secret of the music industry has been the utterly disgusting royalty distribution models, where megacorporations and streaming platforms shamelessly pocket over 80 to 90% of all streaming revenues, leaving independent artists and struggling producers with fractions of a single penny, essentially starving the very creators who provide the soul of global culture. Yoongi's D-Town Global completely shattered this oppressive paradigm by introducing a radical open-source blockchain ecosystem that guarantees a staggering 95% of all streaming profits go directly, instantly, and immutably into the digital wallets of the creators themselves, eliminating the middleman entirely. The immediate reaction from the traditional music industry establishment was absolute, unadulterated panic. Within hours of his announcement, the stock prices of major global streaming giants and legacy entertainment conglomerates plummeted drastically on Wall Street, losing billions of dollars in market value in a single afternoon, because executives suddenly realized that the most influential producer in the world had just handed the keys to total financial freedom directly to the global artistic community. Wall Street analysts and cynical tech billionaires initially tried to ruthlessly mock and dismiss Yoongi's platform, arrogantly calling it an unstable, idealistic pipe dream that would quickly collapse under the sheer weight of global data hosting costs and corporate legal litigation. But Yoongi, possessing an incredibly brilliant, razor-sharp mathematical and legal mind that operates 5 steps ahead of everyone else, had already secretly secured ironclad legal alliances with international copyright cartels and independent musician unions across Europe, Asia, and Latin America, creating an untouchable, bulletproof legal fortress that the major labels couldn't touch. To prove he meant absolute war, Yoongi executed the ultimate leverage move. He officially pulled his entire massive solo catalog, including all his legendary August D mixtapes and award-winning production tracks, entirely off all traditional streaming platforms, making D-Town Global the exclusive home for his music. The sheer, terrifying power of the global army followed him instantly, causing millions of app downloads within the first 24 hours, completely breaking global app store servers, and proving that the traditional gatekeepers of the music industry no longer held any real power over the distribution of culture. What followed in the summer of 2026 was nothing short of a historic, breathless cultural revolution. Inspired by Yoongi's immense courage and unyielding integrity, hundreds of thousands of independent musicians, legendary underground hip-hop artists, and even major mainstream pop stars began aggressively breaking their restrictive, predatory contracts with major labels to migrate their entire discographies over to D-Town Global. During a deeply emotional late-night live stream broadcasted directly from his personal recording studio, looking exhausted but radiating a profound sense of ultimate peace, Yoongi looked deeply into the camera and reflected on this historic gamble with a raw, tear-jerking sincerity that left millions of viewers weeping. He quietly confessed that during his grueling, quiet months of mandatory service, completely stripped of the intoxicating adrenaline of stadium cheers, he found himself thinking deeply about his past, remembering the agonizing despair of his teenage self in Daegu, and thinking about the countless brilliant, incredibly talented young artists today who still take their own lives or give up on their beautiful dreams because they are financially crushed, emotionally broken, and utterly enslaved by a heartless, hyper-capitalist music machine that views them nothing more than replaceable, disposable commodities. He passionately stated demonstrated that he didn't accumulate his immense wealth and global influence just to sit comfortably on a golden throne or flaunt luxury cars. He accumulated it to use as a massive destructive battering ram to smash down the iron gates of corporate greed, ensuring that the next generation of musicians would never have to choose between their art and their survival. This profound, earth-shattering shock completely rewritten the rules of the global entertainment economy in 2026. It ignited an unprecedented global conversation about ethical tech, artistic labor rights, and the true value of human creativity. Major record labels were forced into a humiliating, desperate corner, frantically scrambling to overhaul their entire corporate structures and offer drastically better, fairer profit-sharing percentages to their artists, just to prevent a total mass exodus from their rosters. Min Yoongi didn't just change the music industry, he completely liberated it, transforming himself from an angry, traumatized underground rapper into a masterful, visionary global emancipator who used the very tools of capitalism to hand the power back to the people, forever cementing his legacy not just as an iconic musical genius, but as the ultimate, unyielding godfather of absolute artistic freedom.
Number 4. J-Hope, the street renaissance, defying haute couture, the global healing revolution. When you think of Jungkook, our eternal sunshine J-Hope, your mind instantly flashes to his mesmerizing, gravity-defying choreography, his electrifying stage presence, and his elite status as a premier global fashion icon who could effortlessly shut down Paris Fashion Week with a single glance. He was the golden child of luxury fashion houses, a muse for the world's most exclusive haute couture designers, and an artist who beautifully bridged the gap between the gritty, raw world of underground street dance and the sterile, multi-billion-dollar elite fashion industry. Following his military service, the entire global fashion empire was practically salivating at the prospect of signing him to historic, multi-million-dollar endorsement contracts, expecting him to plaster his flawless visage across massive billboards from Tokyo to New York City. But what J-Hope did in the middle of 2026 didn't just shock the fashion elite, it completely revolutionized how we perceive the social responsibility of a global superstar, sending seismic shockwaves through corporate boardrooms and grassroots communities alike. In a move that completely blindsided his financial advisors and left high fashion executives utterly paralyzed with disbelief, J-Hope officially announced that he was walking away from all his lucrative luxury brand ambassadorships, deliberately turning down tens of millions of dollars in guaranteed corporate revenue. Instead of walking the pristine, exclusive runways of Milan, Hosek took his entire personal fortune, partnered with grassroots community leaders, and quietly launched a monumental, self-funded, completely non-profit global initiative called Hope Street Collective, a revolutionary network of completely free, state-of-the-art dance academies and psychological rehabilitation sanctuaries established exclusively in socio-economically devastated, war-torn, or deeply neglected urban areas across the globe. This wasn't a superficial corporate charity where a celebrity simply signs a giant check and walks away for a tax write-off. J-Hope literally packed up his bags, stepped away from his luxurious lifestyle, and spent months on the ground, living and sweating alongside youth in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, the rough neighborhoods of Detroit, the crowded townships of Soweto, and the overlooked suburbs of Gwangju. He poured his own soul into designing a revolutionary curriculum that treated dance not as a commercial entertainment product or a competitive sport, but as a profound, scientifically backed tool for trauma recovery, emotional expression, and community healing for children who had known nothing but violence, poverty, and systemic despair. Imagine the staggering visual of one of the most famous men on earth, dressed in basic sweatpants and a worn-out t-shirt, sitting on a dusty concrete floor in an underprivileged community center, patiently holding the hands of crying teenagers, teaching them how to channel their anger, their grief, and their generational trauma into the raw, powerful rhythm of street dance.
The mainstream media was initially intensely skeptical, with cynical cultural commentators and corporate fashion analysts aggressively criticizing his move, calling it an overly idealistic, reckless waste of his peak commercial years that would damage his brand equity and alienate high-paying corporate sponsors who favored sterile, apolitical celebrity alignments. But J-Hope, possessing the unyielding, passionate heart of a true street dancer who survived his own early struggles in Gwangju as Smile Hoya, completely ignored the noise, working 18-hour days to establish these sanctuaries, providing not just free world-class dance training, but also free mental health counseling, nutritious meals, and educational scholarships to thousands of underprivileged youth worldwide. By the winter of 2026, the profound emotional impact of this movement became undeniably clear when a massive, beautifully shot documentary showcasing the transformations of these children went viral globally, triggering a massive wave of public tears and forcing the United Nations to officially recognize the Hope Street Collective as a historic breakthrough in cultural diplomacy and youth rehabilitation. The sheer emotional weight of seeing former gang youth and deeply traumatized children finding their voice, their dignity, and their joy through Hosek's unyielding dedication completely melted the hearts of millions, sparking an unprecedented global conversation about the true purpose of fame and wealth. In a deeply moving, reflective letter written to fans on Weavers, J-Hope confessed that during his quiet military service, away from the intoxicating adulation of stadium crowds and the superficial glamour of luxury clothing brands, he looked at his own reflection and realized that his true calling was never to be a passive billboard for the ultra-wealthy, but to use the divine gift of rhythm to heal a broken world, remembering how dance had single-handedly saved his own life when he was a lost, struggling kid with nothing but a dream. This earth-shattering pivot completely forced a massive cultural reset in the global entertainment industry in 2026, establishing a powerful new paradigm where the ultimate metric of a superstar's success was no longer measured by the luxury brands they endorsed or the wealth they accumulated, but the tangible, life-changing human impact they left behind in the darkest corners of society, forever cementing Jung Hosek's legacy not just as a brilliant world-class entertainer, but as a deeply revered, transcendent global healer who used the universal language of dance to bring genuine, undying hope to a world desperately crying out for light.
Number 3. Jimin, the Silent Symphony, defying pop physics, the pure avant-garde revolution. When the global audience thinks of Park Jimin, they instantly picture an ethereal, gravity-defying force of nature who has spent the last decade completely mesmerizing millions with his unique, fluid dance style and his piercing, otherworldly falsetto vocals. From his early days as a prodigy at the Busan High School of Arts, where he topped his department in contemporary dance, Jimin has always possessed a rare, almost spiritual connection to the art of movement, effortlessly blending the sharp, aggressive precision of hip-hop with the breathtaking elegance of traditional Korean dance and modern contemporary ballet. We all remember how his solo tracks like Lie, Serendipity, and his recent chart-topping solo albums completely shattered digital streaming records, solidifying his status as a flawless pop icon who could command a stadium with a single smoldering glance. So, when the rumors began swirling in the spring of 2026 that Jimin was preparing his most ambitious solo project yet, the entire music industry braced itself for a massive multi-million-dollar commercial pop comeback filled with slick music videos, heavy synth beats, and mainstream media saturation. But what Park Jimin actually unleashed upon the world in the summer of 2026 was a creative nuclear bomb that didn't just subvert expectations, it completely demolished the boundaries between mainstream pop culture and elite classical art, leaving the global cultural establishment utterly spellbound and breathless. in a move that sent shockwaves through both the K-pop industry and the notoriously snobbish, hyper-exclusive circles of Western high art. Jimin officially announced that he was taking a complete indefinite hiatus from commercial pop music to join the legendary Paris Opera Ballet as a guest principal dancer and choreographer for an intensely raw, avant-garde contemporary production titled The Echo of Sublimation. This wasn't just a glamorous celebrity cameo or a safe, highly publicized crossover event. Jimin had quietly rejected dozens of lucrative commercial brand deals, canceled planned television appearances, and completely isolated himself for 5 grueling, agonizing months in a secluded, freezing rehearsal hall in Paris, pushing his body to the absolute brink of human physical limitation to create an artistic statement that was purely, unapologetically revolutionary. Imagine the sheer, unparalleled intensity of the scenario. One of the most famous and adored pop stars on the planet, a man who could easily sell out stadiums by just standing still, choosing instead to strip away all the intoxicating armor of global fame, the massive stage pyrotechnics, the dazzling designer outfits, and the flattering studio lighting. Instead, he stepped onto the historic, dimly lit stage of the Palais Garnier, completely barefoot, wearing nothing but minimalist raw linen trousers, with absolutely no makeup to hide the deep lines of exhaustion on his face, and no backing tracks or pop vocals to lean on. The entire 70-minute production was performed in absolute heavy silence, broken only by the haunting, sporadic scratching of a single cello and the raw, echoey sound of Jimin's own heavy breathing and soles scraping against the wooden stage. The performance itself was a profoundly dark, emotionally agonizing exploration of human isolation, the crushing weight of modern societal expectations, and the psychological trauma of the digital age, a theme that Jimin channeled directly from his own deeply personal struggles with intense fame and the grueling, quiet reflections during his recent military service. To achieve the terrifyingly complex, gravity-defying choreography he envisioned, Jimin pushed past severe, chronic back and neck injuries that had plagued him for years, undergoing hours of intense physical therapy every single day just to endure 16-hour rehearsal blocks where he would repeatedly throw his body against the hard floor, seeking a level of raw, unfiltered physical expression that mainstream pop music simply could never accommodate. The elite Western classical art world, which had historically looked down upon K-pop idols with a smug, deeply ingrained intellectual arrogance, dismissing them as mere manufactured, superficial products of a corporate entertainment machine, was completely and utterly silenced the exact second the curtains opened. Jimin's movement was so profoundly agonizing, beautiful, and technically flawless that it defied the very laws of physics, transforming his physical body into a living, breathing canvas of pure human suffering and ultimate spiritual liberation. When the final curtain fell on opening night, the notoriously cold, hypercritical Parisian audience, filled with legendary ballet masters, international art critics, and elite cultural dignitaries, sat in a stunned, breathless silence for a full 30 seconds before erupting into a roaring, tearful 15-minute standing ovation that reportedly shook the historic chandeliers of the theater, with several prominent European critics openly weeping in their seats. Within days, the global media went into an absolute frenzy, with prestigious publications like Le Monde and the New York Times publishing unprecedented glowing front-page reviews declaring Jimin's performance as a historic masterpiece that single-handedly redefined the landscape of modern contemporary dance for the 21st century. But the true earth-shattering shockwave of Jimin's avant-garde revolution was the massive, deeply inspiring cultural shift it ignited among the global youth in 2026. Suddenly, millions of young pop fans who had never once stepped foot inside a classical theater or shown any interest in high art were suddenly flooding local contemporary dance academies, causing a historic, unprecedented 300% surge in dance school enrollments across Asia, Europe, and the Americas, effectively democratizing an art form that had been gatekept by the wealthy elite for centuries. In a deeply reflective, beautifully written letter shared with millions of tearful fans on Weverse after the historic Paris run concluded, Jimin beautifully bared his soul, quietly confessing that during his long, silent months of mandatory military service, away from the deafening, intoxicating screams of stadium crowds, he felt a terrifying, profound void in his heart and began to deeply question whether his art was truly touching people's souls or simply serving as a fleeting commercial escape. He passionately explained that the echo of sublimation was his desperate spiritual survival cry, a necessary shedding of his glamorous idol skin to prove to himself and to the world that dance is a sacred, universal human language that possesses the divine power to heal the deepest, most invisible psychological scars of the human condition without ever needing a single spoken word, a flashing light, or a chart-topping commercial validation. This monumental, profoundly brave cultural pivot completely rewrote the rules of global celebrity culture in 2026, forcibly establishing a new, inspiring paradigm where a pop icon could successfully conquer the highest echelons of classical art through sheer, undeniable technical genius and unyielding artistic integrity, forever cementing Park Jimin's immortal legacy, not just as a flawless, mesmerizing pop superstar, but as a fiercely independent, boundary-shattering avant-garde master who used the raw, unfiltered poetry of his own physical body to heal a fractured, hurting world.
Number 2. Jin, the gastronomic sovereignty, rejecting billion-dollar food conglomerates, the global agricultural heritage revolution. When the world looks at Kim Seok-jin, the eldest member of BTS, universally known as worldwide handsome, they instantly see a man of unmatched charm, sharp wit, an angelic silver vocal tone, and an absolute passion for food and culinary arts that has endeared him to millions over the decade. We all remember his legendary Eat Jin live streams, where he would simply sit, eat, and chat, creating an incredibly intimate bond with fans, and his deep, well-documented fascination with traditional Korean culinary arts, which eventually led him to study under master brewers to craft his own traditional Korean rice wine, alcohol, and artisanal dishes. Following his early discharge from the military, the global corporate food and beverage industry went into an absolute unprecedented frenzy. Every single major multinational fast food chain, elite luxury restaurant conglomerate, and global beverage empire was aggressively hammering down Hybe's doors, desperate to secure his face for historic multi-billion-dollar global endorsement campaigns. By early 2026, major international financial journals began leaking absolutely astounding insider reports that a massive Western food conglomerate had offered Jin an astronomical, eye-watering contract worth over $50 million to launch a global, highly commercialized fast food franchise line under his name, guaranteeing him absolute financial dominance and placing his face on billions of disposable packages across every continent. The entire business world held its collective breath, fully expecting Jin to take the safe, incredibly lucrative corporate route and establish himself as the ultimate global commercial culinary ambassador. But in a move that completely blindsided Wall Street executives, left corporate marketing teams entirely paralyzed with shock, and completely rewrote the rules of ethical consumerism, Kim Seok-jin didn't just reject the massive corporate payout, he completely declared war on industrial food exploitation
innovation by quietly launching Odasan Heritage, a revolutionary, completely self-funded, non-profit global agricultural cooperative and traditional culinary foundation designed to directly rescue endangered traditional farming practices, revitalize dying rural communities, and combat food insecurity through fair trade, sustainable distribution. This wasn't a superficial celebrity branding project or a simple vanity kitchen line. Jin literally used his own massive personal fortune, collaborated with aging traditional farmers across South Korea, Japan, Italy, and Peru, and spent months on the ground in remote, forgotten rural villages, completely stripping away his glamorous superstar persona. Imagine the jaw-dropping visual of one of the most famous and beautiful men on earth, wearing muddy rubber boots, a simple straw hat, and a faded denim shirt, kneeling in the wet soil of a remote rice paddy, or working grueling 18-hour shifts inside a hot, traditional fermentation cellar, getting his hands deeply calloused alongside elderly farmers who had no idea he was a global pop icon. Jin passionately poured his heart into creating an open-source, global network that completely cuts out greedy corporate middlemen, ensuring that small-scale traditional heritage farmers receive a staggering 90% of all retail profits from their organic crops and artisanal products, effectively saving thousands of family farms from being completely crushed and swallowed whole by predatory, chemical-heavy agricultural monopolies. The initial corporate backlash was incredibly condescending and hostile, with elite food industry analysts and cynical financial columnists publicly mocking his venture, calling it an overly idealistic amateur hobby that would quickly collapse under the immense pressure of global supply chain logistics and supermarket distribution politics. But Jin, utilizing an incredibly sharp, brilliant business mind and a relentless work ethic that operates far ahead of his critics, had already secretly formed ironclad distribution alliances with independent organic grocery co-ops and fair trade networks across the globe, ensuring his products reached consumers without ever stepping foot into corporate supermarket chains. To show he was entirely serious about this systemic revolution, Jin executed a brilliant, highly emotional masterstroke. He officially pulled his name and likeness from all potential mainstream commercial food advertisements, making Odasan Heritage the sole focus of his culinary legacy, and launched a beautifully raw, unfiltered documentary series that showed the harsh, heartbreaking realities of modern farmers struggling to survive against corporate greed. The immense emotional power of his dedication triggered an immediate global movement. Within days of the launch, millions of conscious consumers and dedicated armies worldwide completely shifted their purchasing habits, causing a massive historic surge in support for local independent farming markets and creating an unprecedented global shortage of traditional, organically grown heritage grains. During a deeply moving late-night livestream broadcasted directly from a rustic wooden traditional brewery in the Korean countryside, looking visibly exhausted but radiating a profound, soul-stirring sense of ultimate fulfillment, Jin looked directly into the camera and bared his soul to his fans with a raw, tear-jerking honesty that left millions weeping. He quietly confessed that during his long, isolated months of mandatory military service, away from the blinding spotlights and the constant pressure of maintaining the perfect, flawless image of worldwide handsome, he spent his nights thinking deeply about the true meaning of nourishment, remembering his childhood and realizing how dangerously disconnected modern society had become from the earth, from the elderly hands that feed us, and from the sacred, authentic heritage of traditional cooking. He passionately stated that he did not achieve his global fame and wealth just to become a passive tool for massive, faceless corporations that profit off unhealthy, industrially manufactured food while systematically destroying independent farmers. He achieved it to serve as a powerful, unyielding shield for the people who truly sustain human life, ensuring that future generations would never forget the taste of real, love-infused traditional food and the dignity of honest, sustainable agricultural labor. This monumental, profoundly brave shock completely transformed the global food economy and celebrity endorsement landscape in 2026. It ignited an urgent international conversation about food sovereignty, ethical farming, and the massive corporate exploitation hidden in our global food supply. Major multinational food empires were forced into a humiliating defensive corner, frantically scrambling to adjust their corporate practices and offer drastically better, fairer compensation to independent agricultural suppliers just to salvage their tarnished public reputations in the wake of the Jin effect. Kim Suk-jin didn't just enter the culinary world, he completely liberated it, transforming himself from a glamorous pop star into a deeply revered visionary global protector of cultural heritage and human sustainability, beautifully proving to an astonished world that true beauty isn't found under the flashing lights of a stadium stage or on a corporate billboard, but in the muddy, unglamorous soil of the earth, beautifully bringing genuine, life-giving nourishment and undying dignity to a world desperately hungry for truth.
Number 1. RM. The geopolitical sovereignty, defying global hegemony, the silent blueprint for world peace. When we look at Kim Namjoon, the brilliant, towering leader of BTS, known globally as RM, we see a man whose intellectual depth, philosophical wisdom, and immense cultural influence have always transcended the traditional boundaries of a pop musician. We all vividly remember his historic, paradigm-shifting address at the United Nations General Assembly back in 2018, where his iconic Speak Yourself speech deeply moved global leaders and inspired tens of millions of youth worldwide, effectively establishing him as the primary cultural statesman of his generation. For years, the global political establishment, international diplomatic bodies, and elite academic institutions have been quietly watching his trajectory, knowing that his sharp strategic mind and profound global empathy possessed a unique kind of soft power that no politician could ever hope to replicate. Following his honorable discharge from his mandatory military service, a period where he spent months in intense, quiet reflection away from the blinding spotlights, the geopolitical landscape of 2026 was struck by a sudden, terrifying escalation of international tensions, Cold War rhetoric, and systemic polarization that threatened to tear the global community apart at the seams. While the world's most powerful governments scrambled to deploy military assets and trade blockades, Kim Namjoon did something so completely unprecedented, so staggeringly bold, and so profoundly revolutionary that it permanently altered the course of modern history, sending massive shockwaves through the highest halls of global governance from Washington to Beijing. Instead of accepting prestigious, highly publicized honorary diplomatic roles offered by mainstream political establishments, or allowing his image to be used as a passive tool for nationalistic propaganda, RM secretly utilized his immense personal wealth, his unparalleled global network, and his deep personal relations with the world's most elite, independent artists, philosophers, historians, and cultural curators to launch the Pangea Accord, a completely autonomous, non-governmental global cultural council designed to directly bypass corrupt political gridlocks and establish an alternative, unyielding framework for international peace through the radical democratization of historical truth and shared human heritage. This wasn't just a simple, well-meaning celebrity peace charity or a series of superficial cultural festivals. Namjoon literally drafted a brilliant, highly sophisticated 800-page geopolitical blueprint that proposed using cross-border cultural restitution, joint archaeological excavations in highly disputed border territories, and decentralized open-source digital museums to systematically dismantle the hyper-nationalistic, state-sponsored historical narratives that governments aggressively use to manipulate their citizens into hating one another. Imagine the breathtaking, intensely cinematic scenario while world leaders were locked in aggressive, deadlocked security summits surrounded by armed guards and military generals. RM was quietly flying into highly sensitive, volatile geopolitical zones, meeting secretly with underground youth resistance groups, forgotten indigenous elders, and blacklisted academics in fractured regions across the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and East Asia.
He was physically standing in the mud of heavily fortified borders, completely stripping away his glamorous superstar identity, wearing a simple linen shirt and carrying a worn-out leather notebook, using his own voice to bridge centuries-old ethnic divides that billions of dollars in military diplomacy had only worsened. The initial reaction from major global superpowers and cynical geopolitical analysts was one of intense hostility, condescension, and sheer panic. Right-wing media conglomerates and state-sponsored commentators ruthlessly attacked his initiative, arrogantly labeling him a naive, dangerously meddlesome pop star who was compromising national security and stepping into highly complex international affairs that he supposedly had no business interfering in. But Namjoon, possessing an incredibly brilliant, razor-sharp IQ of 148 and a profound, bulletproof understanding of international law and cultural sociology, completely outmaneuvered his detractors by executing the ultimate, highly emotional masterstroke in the autumn of 2026. He successfully organized the first Pangea Summit on a neutral, demilitarized island, completely funded out of his own pocket, forcing top-tier cultural ministers and influential youth leaders from warring nations to sit at the same table, not to negotiate trade tariffs or military borders, but to sign an ironclad treaty pledging to completely remove nationalistic biases from their school history textbooks and jointly preserve endangered global heritage sites. The sheer, overwhelming emotional weight of seeing children from historically hostile nations standing hand in hand under Namjoon's quiet, steady guidance, singing a hauntingly beautiful orchestral anthem composed by RM himself that blended traditional instruments from all their cultures, completely melted the hearts of the global public, triggering an unprecedented, breathless wave of global tears and forcing mainstream international bodies like UNESCO to officially adopt the Pangea Accord as the most effective framework for modern cultural diplomacy ever created. During an incredibly raw, deeply reflective, and tear-jerking global broadcast delivered from a minimalist book-lined study late one evening, looking visibly weathered from his grueling global travels, but radiating an untouchable, transcendent sense of ultimate purpose, Namjoon looked straight into the camera and bared his soul to an audience of over 100 million weeping viewers worldwide. He quietly confessed that during his long, isolated nights of military service, staring out at the heavily fortified borders of his own divided homeland, he felt a crushing, agonizing despair over how easily humanity allows itself to be divided by arbitrary lines drawn in the dirt by greedy, power-hungry politicians who profit off hatred and war. He passionately declared that he did not endure the agonizing sacrifices of his youth, the crushing weights of global fame, and the intense psychological pressures of leading the world's biggest group just to sit back as a passive spectator while the world burned around him. He accumulated his immense global influence to use as a powerful, unyielding shield for the collective soul of humanity, beautifully stating that true leadership isn't about projecting military might or economic dominance over others, but about having the immense courage to strip away the armor of nationalism, look into the eyes of your enemy, and recognize your own shared humanity reflected back at you. This monumental, earth-shattering shock completely rewritten the rules of global diplomacy and celebrity responsibility in 2026. It ignited an urgent, unstoppable international revolution among the global youth, who began aggressively demanding that their governments divest from military warfare and invest instead in cross-cultural education and heritage preservation. Kim Namjoon didn't just lead a group, he led the entire world into a new era of enlightenment, transforming himself from an iconic pop star into a deeply revered, immortal global architect of world peace, forever proving to an astonished planet that the ultimate form of power isn't a nuclear weapon or a corporate empire, but the quiet, unyielding voice of a leader who uses the universal, sacred language of art and truth to heal a fractured world from the inside out.